theyeshiva.net.
So the Gemara in Kiddushin Daf Mem, Tractate Kiddushin 40b, tells the following story. I read, Ukvar hoyer Reb Tarfon uskenim misubin ba'aliyas beis nitze belud. And it was already that Reb Tarfon and the sages were engaged, they were sitting, they were reclining at the attic of the home of Nitze in the city of Lud. Nishala she'ela zu b'fneihem. And this question was asked before them. So the way the story is introduced is Reb Tarfon. Who is Reb Tarfon? Reb Tarfon is one of the greatest Talmudic sages of his time. He is one of the Tanoim who lives in the century after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. He's sitting on an attic in the home of a man named Nitze in the city of Lud in the Holy Land, together with other Skenim, together with other sages. And the way the Gemara introduces the story is, Ukvar hoyu mesubin. They were already reclined. They were already there for a while, and the question was brought before them. What was the question? Talmud Gadol or Maisa Gadol? What is greater, study or deed? Talmud Gadol, is study greater, or Maisa Gadol, or action, deed is greater? Nene Reb Tarfon v'Amar. Reb Tarfon responded by saying, Maisa Gadol, deed is greater. Nene Rabbi Akiva v'Amar. Rabbi Akiva responded and said, Talmud Gadol, study is greater. Nenu kulam v'yamru. And then everybody responded and said, Talmud Gadol, shaha Talmud mevi l'dei maisa. Study is greater because study brings to action. And that concludes the story. So Rashi explains what is the nature of the argument. Reb Tarfon said, action is greater, Maisa Gadol. Rabbi Akiva said, Talmud Gadol, study is greater. Everybody said, Talmud Gadol, study is greater, Shaha Talmud mevi l'dei maisa, because study brings to action. So Rashi says, Nimtzu shneim biyadai. So when you have real study, you have both, because study, learning, brings to maisa, brings to action. So when you have study, automatically you have study and you have action. So for sure it's greater. The story is a perplexing one. The way it's introduced is they were already sitting there. What means they were already sitting there? For a month, for a year, for a decade. Ukvar hoyu. It's like a continuation of an old story. They were already there. And this question was brought before them. This seems like a new story. What's the ukvar? They were there already. It's like it's a continuation of something that happened long ago. Then we must wonder, what's the nature of the question? What is this person, is this a philosophical question? Is this a practical question? Is this a theological question? Is this a halachic question? What does the person want to know? What's greater, Talmud or Maisa? What's greater, Pesach or Shavuos? What's greater, this mitzvah or that mitzvah? What does the person want to know? A person needs to study and a person needs to do. The Torah says both. The Torah speaks about study and the Torah speaks about Maisa. What's the question of Talmud Gadol or Maisa Gadol? Is this a practical question? He wanted to learn and not do. He wanted to do and not learn. Reb Tarfon answers, action is greater. Rabbi Akiva says, learning is greater. What's the logic in each? And then Nenu Kulam, and then everyone responds together and says, we got the answer. Talmud Gadol, learning is greater. Why? Sha Talmud mevi l'dei maisa, because it brings to action. So then learning is not greater. The reason learning is greater is because it brings to action. So action is greater. Rashi says, because when you learn, you have both. In other words, the reason we say learning is greater is not because learning is greater. If it wouldn't have brought to action, we wouldn't say learning is greater. Talmud Gadol, shaha Talmud mevi l'dei maisa, because the learning brings to action. So when you have learning, you don't have to ask who's greater, because you got both. And how could you learn, and how could you have action without learning? Action has to be preceded by knowing what to do, how to do, when to do, where to do. Meiser requires Talmud. It sounds like that's the halacha, because that's what the majority said. Talmud Gadol. And yet at the end of the day, we're not really answering the question, because we're saying Talmud Mevi Lidei Meiser, so it sounds like Meiser is Gadol. So who are we siding with? Are we siding with Reb Tarfon or are we siding with Rabbi Akiva? The fascinating thing is, in Sifrei Kabbalah and Chassidus, it says that La'asid Lavai, the halacha is going to be like Reb Tarfon. Today they said Talmud Gadol Sha Talmud Mevi Lidei Meiser. Talmud is great because Talmud brings to action. It says in the future when Mashiach comes, the halacha is going to be like Reb Tarfon, Meiser Gadol. Action is greater. What's the logic of that? If Talmud Gadol, because Talmud Mevi Lidei Meiser, so Talmud seems to have both. And when you only have Meiser, then you're missing Talmud. When you think about this question, and that the fact that this question was presented to some of the greatest sages of the time, means this wasn't such a simple, inconsequential question where somebody just needed to come up with a question. What's greater, learning or doing? Do both. But there was a profound question here. And this question had two different answers. Rabbi Tarfon gave one answer. Rabbi Akiva gave a different answer. And then everybody said, Talmud is great, like Rabbi Akiva, because it brings to action, like Reb Tarfon. And here we come back to exploring the very delicate question and balance of the original split that apparently was woven into the fabric of the Jewish people from our Genesis, between two brothers. We explored last week, the Haftarah of Parshas Yecheskel, the Haftarah of Parshas Vayechi. Last week's Haftarah, where Yecheskel Hanavi, Ezekiel the prophet, in chapter 37, describes a fascinating prophecy where the Rebbeinu Shalom, God tells him to take two sticks, two branches. On one stick, you remember, he writes the name Ephraim. On the other stick, he writes the name Yehudah. The two sticks represent the fact that the Jewish world has been split into two kingdoms, two monarchies. As we learned after Shlomo passed away, he was succeeded by Rechavam, and during the early days of Rechavam, there was a split among the Jewish people. And a new king emerged by the name of Jeroboam ben Nevat, who came from the tribe of Ephraim. Ephraim, a son of Yosef. Where Rechavam was the son of Shlomo, who was the son of David, who was the son of Ovid, who was a son of Yishai, who was a son of Ovid, who was a son of Boaz, who traces his genealogy back to Peretz, who was a son of Yehudah. One of the twins who Tamar gave birth to from Yehudah, from the dynasty of Shevet Yehudah versus Shevet Yosef. And once that split happened, it continued for close to 3 centuries. It split the Jewish world, obviously emotionally, politically, militarily, strategically. It weakened the fabric of Jewish civilization. Ultimately, 10 tribes are exiled by the Assyrian king 150 years before the destruction of the first temple by Babylonia, and then a century and a half later, the last 2 tribes are exiled by Nebuchadnezzar, Melech Bavel, in a process that begins on Asara B'Teves, on the 10th day of Teves, as the Navi Yecheskel says. The Navi Yecheskel observed. He lived during the era of the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash by Bavel. He himself was exiled from the Holy Land to Babylonia, which is present-day Iraq, and that's where he prophesies Al Nahar Kvar, on the river of Kvar in Babylonia, present-day Iraq. And Yecheskel HaNavi says how the prophet, who he was told to write down, to write down about the day of Asara B'Teves, the 10th of Teves today, when Samach Melech Bavel El Yerushalayim, when the Babylonian king besieges, creates a fortress, a siege, around the city of Jerusalem, trying to choke the population, not allowing transport from inside to the city, outside, or the other way around, not allowing food or water to be brought into the city, not allowing free transportation. He wants to starve and choke the city until they will surrender. And indeed, the siege begins on the 10th day of Teves by Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian emperor, which is the reason that it has been established by the prophets, not by the rabbis, by the prophets, Divrei Kabbalah, as one of the 4 fasts of the year, Asara B'Teves, since one might ask a question, so many years have passed since that day of Asara B'Teves, the first time you're dealing with approximately 2,500 years ago. That's a long time, and the answer, of course, is that Jewish history is one. Jewish history is cohesive. It's integrated. It's holistic. When you light your Shabbos candles Friday afternoon, you can, in your mind, watch your daughters light Shabbos candles, watch your mother light Shabbos candles. You can imagine Sarah and Rivka and Rachel and Leah lighting their Shabbos candles. You walk into Beis Medrash, you walk into Yeshiva, and you hear the boys learning Gemara and Mishnayos, and they're quoting Reb Meir, Reb Akiva, Reb Shimon, Reb Yossi, Reb Tarfon, as we just quoted. Abaye, Rav, Shmuel, Reb Nachman, Reb Yosef, and all these people are entering into the room. They're alive and well. The conversation continues. Jewish history is a conversation that's never interrupted. It's a conversation that goes on. A teacher is teaching his students, and he opens a Rambam and he quotes a Rambam. He opens a Rashi and quotes a Rashi. And in one's imagination, the Rambam and Rashi, who lived 800-900 years ago, are in the room, presenting themselves, defending themselves, debating with each other, etc. Which is how the Jewish people managed to retain not only their dignity, but their heritage in a consistent and extraordinary fashion through thick and thin. Because Asara B'Teves was not just a relic of some ancient history in an era that is bygone and is so long ago, but rather it continues to have its impact and its memory on Jewish history till today. That split is ultimately what caused the weakening of the Jewish nation. The 2 sticks that were fragmented and separated, Yosef, Yehudah, Ephraim, and Yehudah, Rechavam and Yeravam. And when the last king of the northern kingdom is exiled, there's now one king left in Jerusalem, but much weaker. Much of the Jewish people has been exiled, and as we know, a century later, assimilated. One of the great mysteries of Jewish history, we still don't know what happened to most of the 10 tribes of Israel. And by the way, you shouldn't think that today all Jews come from Yehudah and Binyamin, because there were members of other tribes who lived in Jerusalem and other cities, so they weren't exiled. Majority of the Aseres HaShvatim were exiled, but not all of them. So you still have Jews today who, of course, come from Yehudah and Binyamin, the 2 tribes which remained in Jerusalem loyal to the monarchy of David HaMelech, to the dynasty of David HaMelech. But you also have Jews from other tribes, even though today we don't really identify who's who as a result of this confusion and uncertainty over so many millennia. But you have Jews from Shimon and from Yisachar and Zvulun and Dan, Naphtali, Yosef, Binyamin, of course Yehudah and Binyamin, and of course also Levi, because the Kohanim and the Leviim, some of them were also exiled, but many of them who were serving in Yerushalayim or living nearby also survived the expulsion of the 10 tribes. And the Rebbeinu Shalom tells you, Cheskel, take these 2 sticks and put them together. And in your hand they will become one stick, because there will be a day when the 2 monarchs will not be split anymore. There will be Melech Echad, one king, V'roya Echad Yiyeh Lekulam, one shepherd, V'lo Yechatzu L'shtei Mamlachos. They will not be split into 2 mamlachos, 2 governments, 2 monarchies, 2 empires, 2 civilizations, 2 peoples. They will become completely one. V'avdi David Melech Aleim La'olam. V'David Avdi Nasi Lahem La'olam. My servant David, V'avdi David, will be the king, because Mashiach comes from the dynasty of David HaMelech. As the Rambam says, Melech HaMashiach has to be Mizera David Ushloima. Mashiach traces his genealogy to which family? To the family of King David. In other words, to the family of Rechavam, Shloima, David, going back all the way to Boaz, Peretz, and Yehudah. So the ultimate king, Mashiach, is not from Yosef. It's from Yehudah, and yet there will be complete unity. There will not be 2 sticks, there will be 1 stick. Which begs the question, I could understand if you do a rotation between Yehudah and Yosef, a few years a king from Yehudah, a few years a king from Yosef, there is unity. What is the method of unity when ultimately the king comes from Yehudah? That is exactly what Ephraim and the other tribes revolted against. And yet he says the two sticks will become one, and the king will be from David HaMelech. What's exactly this mechanism of unity? The king will be from David, and yet there will be complete unity. The Gemara in Maseches Sukkah and the Zohar speak about even two Mashiachs. There's a Mashiach ben Yosef and a Mashiach ben David. The Mashiach ben Yosef is a Mashiach who comes from Yosef, but he comes before Mashiach ben David. And among various Sfarim, there's been a lot of discussion about Mashiach ben Yosef, especially Sfarim of the Vilna Gaon and students of the Vilna Gaon and other Sfarim. But the concept of Mashiach ben Yosef is that before the ultimate Geula, Mashiach ben Yosef precedes and comes before Mashiach ben David. Some place it even says Mashiach ben Yosef will be killed, and then ultimately Mashiach ben David will come and there will be complete unity. And then there is the story with which we began our entire discussion and serves really as the vortex of the entire conversation, and that's the story of the man who created the split. Yeroboam ben Nevat, who was considered one of the greatest of the great and yet became a heinous, one of the greatest sinners, and when he's offered by God to do tshuva and to take a stroll in Gan Eden together with David HaMelech, he grabs him by his robe and says, me, you, and Ben Yishai will take a stroll in Gan Eden, and Yeroboam wants to know, me, Berosh, who goes first? And God says, David HaMelech, and he says, I refuse the offer, I'm not interested. And this story keeps us perplexed because why would any human sane person, never mind a great soul, refuse such an offer? What went through his mind? How arrogant can you be? And why can't everybody stroll together? Why does there even have to be a preference? And the most important question, God told him he's going to go first. Me, you, and Ben Yishai will take a stroll. Why are you asking? And when he asks who goes first, he's told Ben Yishai goes first. And then we have the two structures of the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash that we also began to discuss. How does this all come together? So what we have to understand is that already in the genesis of Jewish history, there's a tension that is woven into the very fabric of our existence. Do the two forces have to be tense with each other? Must they collide? Must there be conflict? The prophet Yecheskel says no. Conflict is not inevitable. It's not the ultimate destiny. The two sticks can become one. But the only way two sticks can become one is if you appreciate their duality. Because if you don't appreciate the tension, you can't create unity within the tension. All unity must encompass diversity. It can't exclude diversity, deny diversity, crush diversity, repress diversity, make believe it doesn't exist. To give a simple illustration of a topic that some of you may know a little about. Sometimes a groom and a bride will get engaged, and the chassan might say about the kala might say about the chassan, we are identical. He finishes my sentences, I finish his sentences. We have the same taste, the same flavor, the same appetite, the same instinct, the same disposition, the same inclination, the same interests, the same proclivities. We're mamish the same. We even look the same. And it's wonderful. It sounds like an unbelievable romantic reality. The challenge is that very often as two people live together, they discover that they're not mamish the same. If they never discover that there are differences, adarabah, God bless their union. But very often people discover that there are differences. And differences, especially when they're fundamental or they're deep, they're not just skin deep. It's not like you want a milchika restaurant or a fleishika restaurant, which can also be a good cause for a debate in a Jewish couple. I've seen it. But especially when issues are a little more than deeper than skin deep, it can create tension. And the solution for unification is never denying the tension, making believe that there are no differences. repressing it, crushing it, because then you're not unifying two people. You're just eliminating one in the process. It may look like unity, but it's not unity. It's simply obliterating one. There's a t-shirt that reads, "I'm very easy to get along with once you learn to worship me." So, of course, I'm extremely easy to get along with when you learn to worship me, because there's no you. If there's only I, then it's very easy to get along with me, because I just have to get along with myself. I just have to deal with my issues, not with your issues. But we all understand that shalom, peace, must include the two. It must bring together disparate forces. It must unify, synthesize, and integrate differences. And that's a process. It's a process because it's real. For unity to be authentic, it must acknowledge the possibility for tension. And that's why whenever you're in a relationship and you can identify the possible tension, that identification must not lead to tension. It can also lead to much deeper awareness and hence much deeper love and much deeper unity. Because a love and a unity that is based on denial is based on the fact that I'm not ready to confront differences. I'm not ready to say, this is how I feel, or this is how I feel. This really hurts me. This is not going to work for me. This truly pains me. This is something sitting on me, and I can't make peace with it. If couples cannot have that conversation, it means they can't have a real conversation that encompasses their authentic identity, which means that the relationship is usually either fake or extremely external. And whenever it's external, then when it hits a stumbling block, or when life becomes a little more stressful or challenging, then and truth comes out, often there is disintegration and chaos and conflict, because there was no resolution that dealt with the true individual identities of the two people. This is true in the micro, and it's also true in the macro of Jewish history. Must there be a tension between Yosef and Yehudah? No. That's what the Navi says. The two sticks will become one, but they're two sticks. It's not one stick becoming one. One stick doesn't have to become one. It's two sticks becoming one. So identifying differences could be done in two ways. One, as a prelude to a conflict. Or two, as a prelude to a deeper understanding and sense of oneness and unification. Whenever we identify tension, there is also right in that very experience the possibility for a new consciousness, for a higher consciousness. It's almost like when you get, you'll spill the beans. Tell me what you want to tell me. As long as you haven't been telling me for 10 years what you wanted to tell me, this is never going to work. Say it. And say it with all of its intensity. Say it the way it is. It hurts. But it would be like a doctor saying, we're not going to open up the skin to take out the infection because it's grotesque, it's ugly. We'll just put a nice Band-Aid. The problem is Band-Aids are wonderful, but they're good for a little scratch, not for a deep disease, heaven forbid, or an infection that is simmering beneath the surface. One has to bring it out in order to be able to identify it, in order to be able to deal with it. Yes, we have to know how and when and have guidance. That tension should be the prelude to unity and not the prelude to more fighting. This is the opposite issue. No one fact or truth should ever be worshipped to one extreme, because everything has side effects. The best medication in the world can be destructive if one doesn't recognize its side effects and one doesn't know the right dosage, the right time. And that's true about everything, including the notion of exposing truth. Sometimes exposing truth in the wrong time, the wrong place, to the wrong person is itself the greatest lie. But nonetheless, essential to understanding the unity of the two sticks is the understanding of the two sticks and the fact that there is room for conflict, and hence a need for a deeper awareness to create unification. What is this tension? that is woven into the very fabric of Jewish history and resurfaces again and yet again and yet again. It begins with Rachel and Leah. It continues in their children. Yehudah versus Yosef. Yosef, a son of Rachel. Yehudah, a son of Leah. The conflict between Yosef and his brothers was very profound. It ended up almost in catastrophe and death. Yosef was saved at the end, and the story ends well, but not without wounds, and not without a deep impact. And even though Yosef forgives his brothers, it seems so from the Chumash, Yosef nurtures them, Yosef embraces them, Yosef is the paradigm of forgiveness and reconciliation even under such difficult circumstances. In Parshas Vayechi, after Yaakov passes away, the brothers are afraid that now he will take revenge. They send a message that their father asked Yosef to forgive. And Yosef breaks down crying and he says, Hasachas Elokim ani, do you think I see myself in lieu of God? Do you think I sit on the throne of God and I think that I'm God? Atem chashaftem l'rav Elokim chashav l'tayva. You may have devised an evil scheme against me, but God's scheme was absolutely positive. I came here to save the entire world, including our entire family, from a devastating famine that would have eliminated everybody, heaven forbid. And thus Yosef ultimately sees his life as a blessing because of his ability to reframe his past. But nonetheless, the tension is not eliminated. The very fact that they believe that Yosef has not forgiven them after Yaakov's passing is proof to it. And even though there is peace in Egypt, but as we see, when they leave Egypt, Moshe is the leader, Moshe is the king, he's from the tribe of Levi. Kingship will then go to Yehoshua, who's from the tribe of Yosef, Gidon, who's from the tribe of Yosef, Shaul, who's from the tribe of Binyamin, David and Shloimeh and Rechavim from the tribe of Yehudah, and then it will split and go back to Yeroboam. The pendulum will now shift to Yeroboam, who's from the tribe of Yosef, and now there will be officially a split. There's not one king among the Jewish people, there's two kings. And yet kingship was promised to the dynasty of David HaMelech, not to the other dynasty. The Navi Achia Shaleni told Yeroboam, you will be the king, but not forever. Achloi kol hayamim, as the Radak says, because Yecheskel says that there will one day be unity. And then when the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, the beginning of the catastrophe of Asara B'Teves, Malchus never returns to the Jewish people. Not to Yehudah, not to Yosef. Because at the next chapter, Babylonia is defeated by Persia. Persia is defeated. Persia gives them permission to come back and rebuild under Persian jurisdiction, Cyrus, Kyrish. Persia is defeated by the Greek Empire. And the Chashmonaim, who defeat the Greeks, do become kings, but only for a temporary time, for almost a century, and it goes to the tribe of Levi, again from Leah. Then the Romans ultimately take over, and when the second Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, Malchus has still not to return to the Jewish people until Bias HaMashiach, when the two sticks come together. Va'avdi David melech aleim la'olam v'roya echad yiyeh l'kulam. Va'avdi David nasi lahem la'olam. The two sticks would become one, and even that's preceded by a Mashiach ben Yosef. But this time, Mashiach ben Yosef is a prelude to Mashiach ben David, rather a competition, a competitor, a rival of Mashiach ben David. And when the Navi introduces the fact that the two sticks become one, he says, Va'avdi David melech aleim la'olam. My servant David will be the king. Va'avdi David nasi aleim la'olam. David will be the one king that will unite Yosef and Yehudah. How could he if he's David from Yehudah? Mashiach ben David from Yosef, from Yehudah, not from Yosef. The word is Va'avdi, my servant David. This is the backdrop. And now we move it in Judaism. The beauty, one of the most beautiful elements of learning of Talmud, of Yiddishkeit, is the intricate connection between the micro and the macro. Meaning, just as in our DNA, every element, every component of the DNA that we have, a double copy of the DNA in every cell of the 40 trillion cells. Every single cell of 40 trillion cells in the body has within it the manual, the code, the instructions for the entire organism. One cell can teach you about the entire organism. Zois HaTorah Adam. The smallest detail in Torah, the most micro component, reflects the macro. And the macro reflects the micro. Meaning, huge historic events, trends, streams, conflicts, issues, tension, is reflected also within the individual psyche. Shlomo HaMelech says in Ecclesiastes and Kayelis, Games ha'olam nosan belibam. The entire universe is in your heart. And when you can identify that conflict in your own heart, you can heal it in the world. Because the human who is at the vortex of creation, at the eye of the storm, when I can identify it in my own heart and my own psyche, and I work within myself, the expression we take by Kriya Shema, this is Pshat and Davening, Ruach Sa'ara Oisa Dvarai, that you said this morning. Ruach Sa'ara Oisa Dvarai. The stormy winds follow his command. By davening, it says before Kriya Shema. So, but there's the blessing Avas Oilam. We say, Va'avienu l'shalom me'arba kanfis ha'aretz. You should bring us back to peace from the four corners of the world. So it says in Shulchan Aruch that at that, the Poskim say, at that moment, one who's wearing a talis should collect together all the four tzitzis. So it's really a fascinating idea. I bring together my four tzitzis, and what is this? Va'avienu l'shalom me'arba kanfis ha'aretz. I'm uniting the whole world. Really? What world am I uniting? I'm getting my four tzitzis together. But the macro and the micro are deeply, deeply intertwined. I see myself and I could see the universe. I see the universe, I could see myself. The world is in your heart. And that's why in Judaism, large trends, small trends are all very deeply interconnected. This entire conflict that we're talking about is reflected within every person's individual life on a regular Wednesday, on a regular Tuesday. And what is this tension? What are these two trends? And what we began to address is, it's the great question of life. The great question of life is the question that was asked to these sages on the attic of the house of Nitzah in Lud, in Kiddushin Daf Mem. And it's expressed in two words, Talmud Gadol or Maisa Gadol. What is greater, learning or action? This wasn't just a technical question. If I have an hour, should I sit and learn, or should I go do the right thing? There's halachas about that. What comes first? What overrides first? Chazal tell us in Maseches Moed Katan, mitzvah she'ef shelasas aidei acherim is doichet Talmud Torah. A mitzvah that I cannot do through another person. I have to do it myself. If not, the mitzvah will not be done. Overrides learning, etc., etc. This is a question that is really a cosmic question. What is greater in the ultimate scheme of things? Talmud or Maisa? Learning or action? Learning and action represent two very different notions in human life. Learning represents the work of self-perfection, self-development, development of the self. All that goes into the one word Talmud. Learning is not just about facts. We're going to learn how to check our lettuce for worms. Or we're going to learn how to put out a blech on the stove. Or we're going to learn what you're allowed to put on the blech, what you're not allowed to put on the blech. And how to make a tea on Shabbos. That's also learning. But learning is the encompassing term that represents the path of Judaism towards development of self. Learning means awareness. Understanding life, understanding the universe, and most importantly, understanding your place in that universe. Maisa action represents submission of self to service. Like we'll say, the deed has to be done. Action. Now is time for action. And we all know in life, these are two different experiences. And the question that's been asked for thousands of years is, what's its focus? Should the focus of life be self-development, self-actualization, self-enhancement? Should the focus of life be self-transcendence, submission, surrender, a life of service? When you look at Judaism and Torah, you'll see both notions expressed in very vivid ways. I mentioned to you what the Pasuk says, Chazal say it many times. Lo nitnu ha-mitzvahs el l'tzarev behenes habriyas. Vayitzavenu Hashem lasas es kol ha-chukim ha'ela. Torah mitzvahs is a blueprint for a successful, wholesome, meaningful, happy life. Chayev adam loymar b'shvili nivra ha'olam. For some people, the focus in life is, I want to suck the marrow out of my life. I want to live my life to the fullest. I want to die knowing that I lived. One of the most painful things about a person, about some people is, somebody once told me, he said, I'm afraid of dying, not because I'm afraid of dying. I'm afraid that when I die, I will discover that I never lived. If you could teach me how to live, I will not be afraid of dying. It was a profound idea. Yaakov Avinu tells Yosef these words, Amusa hapam acharei re'osi es panecha. I can at last close my eyes with a smile. I can close my eyes with a certain comfort, with a certain solace. A Jew, a friend of mine, a student of mine in Flatbush once shared with me that he had his grandfather. His grandfather was in Auschwitz. And every Pesach after the Seder, they had a tradition in the family. A lot of Polish Jews who went through the war, they wouldn't speak a whole year. A lot of East European Jews, Bechlal, didn't speak. This was a minig, an old minig by Jews, you don't speak. But certainly after the war, what they've been through, some spoke, but many, many did not speak. For years, some of their own family members, they heard screaming in the middle of the night. They knew that there are difficulties and challenges, but they didn't know the story. But some had a minig that would speak once a year, the night of Pesach. So he told me that his Seder, after the Seder, all the grandchildren and children would come together. They would finish the Seder, eat Afikoyman and say Hallel and Lashana Haban, Chad Gadi, whatever they sang. Echad Miyadeya, Adirhu. And then he would tell of his experiences before the war and during the war and after the war. And he learned about his whole history, Zayda and Baba, from those conversations that would go sometimes till 3, 4 in the morning, every single year. Sometimes he would repeat the same stories, share new stories. And this friend of mine, this student of mine, his name is Avram, he's a doctor, Maimonides, he told me that his grandfather told him one year, he's the oldest grandson, that he was married. He was married before the war. This is not his original family. He never knew that he once had a family. You know, it's hard to imagine that a Zayda was once married to another woman with other children, with a whole other family. But this was not infrequent, as you know. And he was transported in the cattle cars to Auschwitz with his wife and their 1-year-old baby. And they got off the train, if you can call it a train, it was more like a cattle car. And they came through those infamous gates with the sign, Arbeit macht frei. Well, I don't know if they came in through those gates, because wherever the cattle car stopped, depends what point during the Holocaust it was, it stopped at 2 different locations. But in any case, they came out. He said they went through in this case, they went through the gate. And there was an SS soldier there who seemed no older than 18 or 19 years old. And he grabbed the baby from the Zayda's arms, from his arms. He was telling his grandson. He grabbed the baby from my arms, threw the baby into the air, shot him in the air, smiled to the mother and the father, and said these words, "Welcome to Auschwitz." That was what his grandfather told him at the Seder night, to discuss his own Galus Mitzrayim, his own Egyptian exile, where children were snatched away and thrown into the Nile, and in Auschwitz snatched away and murdered. This boy told me, years later he got married. As the oldest grandson, he had his first child, his first son. And he brought his son the day before the bris to meet the Elter Zayda, to meet the great-grandfather. He was already an older man in his 80s. And he brought him the first great-grandson. And he came to his home. He was there himself on the couch. And he rang the bell. He opened the door and he said, "Zaydi, as you know, we had a baby. Tomorrow is the bris." I think he gave him to be the sandik, and he should see the baby the night before. Vachnacht. And he brought in the carriage into the dining room. And Avremi told me, he said, "I decided I want to leave the room, because I knew this is going to be an emotional moment for my grandfather, and I shouldn't be there. It may be, he may want to be with himself and his own thoughts. So I didn't do it in a dramatic way. I just left the carriage there, said, Zaidi, here's the baby. And I went out, but I didn't really go out. I went to the door and I watched. And he said, my grandfather, who was very, very sensitive to what has happened, like obviously all people, looked at the baby, picked up the baby, kissed the baby, caressed the baby, sang with the baby, played with the baby. Mamash, a 7-day-old infant, put the baby back in the carriage very subtly, very lovingly and warmly. And then he said, I'll never forget. He looked up to heaven and he said, I'm ready. He looked up to heaven and he said 2 words, I'm ready. A week later, he passed away. A week later, he was 87 years old. He said, I'm ready. It was for him, his life complete. He didn't only survive, he recreated a future, he recreated a destiny. The symphony of his family and the symphony of Jewish history continued to play and resound in great joy and jubilation. He said, I'm ready, I'm finished. A week later, he had a stroke, he passed away the next day or so. He was a sandik at the bris, and that was that. What was that about? I don't know. It's very hard to understand what goes through people's deep souls at such moments of truth. But there was a certain sense of, I did something, and I dedicated myself to this with blood, sweat, and tears, and I completed the task. Yaakov tells Yosef, Amusa hapam, I'm ready to close my eyes. I'm ready to say goodbye. Nobody ever wants to say goodbye, but I'm not afraid to say that I didn't live. The word Yosef means growth. What's the mindset of growth? The mindset of growth is you were not sent down to the world to kvetch and be a victim. You were not sent down to the world to allow other people to step on you and crush you. You were not even just sent down to the world to be quiet and fulfill your duties. You were sent down to the world to maximize your light, to be able to give yourself and the world your tremendous lichtigkeit. You are an ambassador of love, light, and hope. Tzaddik kat Yosef is called a tzaddik. Tzaddik katama yifrach, ke'erez balavana yizga. The tzaddik blossoms like a date tree, grows like the cedar in Lebanon. I don't know how many of you have been to Lebanon and have observed the cedar trees in Lebanon. But the fact is, there's nothing like cedar trees in Lebanon. I don't know if you should go especially to Lebanon. For this, you should trust me. Probably safer. But ke'erez balavana in Yizga, Lebanon wasn't always what it is today. Hezbollah stronghold. In Lebanon, they had the most beautiful, tall, splendid trees. This is what Yosef is compared to. Why? Yosef represented the mindset of Haisafa, Lahaisef, growth. Seeing life as an opportunity for self-discovery, self-actualization in the deepest, most powerful, and most exciting way. How tragic is it so often to see people who have so much in them, and yet they die pregnant with potential. As the Balatanya says, there are 2 types of miscarriages. There's the biological miscarriage, heaven forbid, of a fetus, but there's also a miscarriage of people's dreams, of people's potentials. They remain absorbed in the womb of potential and never see the light of day. Yirmiyah Hanavi cursed himself and he said, I wish I would have remained forever pregnant in my mother's womb. Haras oilam rachma, I wish I would have never seen the light of day. Yirmiyah had a very challenging life and he sometimes wished that he was never born. Some people don't wish it on themselves, but somehow they let it happen to themselves. So much creativity, so much beauty, so much potential, so much light, so much love, so much wisdom, so much depth, So much power stifled, crushed. There's a miscarriage. It never comes out. Not only not to other people, also not to themselves. And Yosef represented the exact opposite of that. Yosef was shoved and crushed and beaten and descended v'Yosef hurad Mitzrayim. He was lowered. Every opportunity of normalcy was taken away from him. And somehow he managed to turn every obstacle into an opportunity for new discovery, for new opportunity. It's incredible how he did it. And the Medrash brings it out in one way. It says, Yosef hurad Mitzrayim. Yosef was lowered into Mitzrayim. So the Medrash Rabbi says, hurad in Hebrew means lowered, yerida, but hurad has another meaning in Hebrew. In Bereshis, Hashem tells Adam and Chava, Pru'ervu, umilu es ha'aretz v'kivshua. Multiply, fill the world and conquer it. Uridu bidgas hayam, ubechayesayv, ubechol remes hashamayim. I want you to rule over the world. We say taka in Tehillim, Yifrach b'yamav tzadik, v'roiv shalom ad bli areach, v'yerd miyam ad yom u'minar ad afsei aretz. He will rule from sea to sea. V'Yosef hurad Mitzrayim, says the Medrash, hurad comes from the word redu. He was lowered into Egypt? No, he was ruling over Egypt. Excusez-moi. He was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, he was ruling. Years later he became a ruler. That's not how he saw it. Even in the abyss, he was a king. And the reason he was a king even in the abyss is because he understood that every single moment of life, even a moment that seems difficult, bleak, dark, is an opportunity to conquer even this moment. Opportunity to bring light into this moment, to use it as a catalyst for a new truth, for a new awareness, as a springboard for growth. So he became a king in every moment because he was never a victim to the moment. He defined it. It didn't define him. No challenge defined him. He defined the challenge as an opportunity. And an obstacle, a challenge becomes a real obstacle only when you bow to it, when you become a victim to it. But Yosef remained a cedar tree. Ke'erez balavana and Yisgeh. Now, when you talk about the philosophy of Yosef, it exists in the most subtle levels and in the most brute levels. Somebody might say the purpose of life is simply for me to be comfortable at any given moment. The focus is, I want to be comfortable. What is comfort? A more developed person will define comfort in a deeper way. I want to feel pleasure. What is pleasure? Pleasure exists on many layers. But the common denominator is, I want to become the person who I am. I want to flex every muscle. I want to develop every vein, every artery, every dimension. I want my soul to be actualized, my body to be actualized. It's not easy work. It takes avodah. Yosef is the paradigm of growth mindset. Now comes Yehudah. Yehudah comes from the word hoidah. Leah named him Yehudah hapam oida. Now I will be grateful. The Medrash says he's named Yehudah because he's the first one to confess publicly. After the story with Tamar, he says, Mimeni, I was the one who did it. Yehudah also comes from the word moida, submit, acquiesce. All represent surrender. Saying thank you is vulnerable. Saying I'm sorry is vulnerable. And saying you were right is vulnerable. That's why some people have a hard time saying thank you. I don't mean thank you for passing the tissue box. I mean looking somebody in the eyes and saying, thank you for changing my life. Thank you for what you did for me. Thank you for bringing this into my world. It's very hard for people to be vulnerable and say, I'm sorry, I apologize. There was once a woman, she asked her husband, did you ever make a mistake in your life? Ever? And he says, actually once. She got all excited. Really? You can admit that you made a mistake? She says, really? Tell me about it. He says, it was back in 61. She says, what was the mistake? He said, I thought I made a mistake. To be able to say, I made a mistake. That joke is over, by the way. To be able to say, I made a mistake. I apologize. I'm sorry. It's vulnerable. It's vulnerable. It's greatness, but it's vulnerable. And to be able to say, I was wrong, you're right, to be able to see the validity of another opinion, it's very hard. Some people will fight their whole life not having to say, I'm sorry. They will destroy themselves and their children. The ikir is, I won't apologize. Not to say thank you. Not to surrender. Not to be vulnerable. Because I could never be vulnerable. I could never show my true colors because for them it's akin to suicide. You could never be a leader that way. You can never be a melech. Yehudah was the paradigm. He's the first person to confess in public. And he represents a life of service, of dedication, of duty. We had a president who once said, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. The Balatanya once told a chassid, du sagst als was du darfst. For was redst du nicht wegen dem was me darf dir. You speak about what you need. What about what you're needed for? There's what you need and there's what you're needed for. Yehudah is the one who actually executes the fact that Yosef, who's in the pit, will remain there. Yehudah says, let's sell him. Even though he sells him, but he saves him as well. Yehudah is the one who, when they have to bring Binyamin down to Egypt, Reuven tells Yaakov, you'll kill both of my sons if I don't bring him back, and Yaakov dismisses him. Reuven gets up to Yaakov and says, Anochi ervenu miyadi tevakshenu. I will be the guarantor. If I don't bring him to you, I will remain a sinner to you all the days of my life. Yehudah is the one who appreciates the value of action, of getting things done, and the value of taking a stand in a position of service. What is needed right now at this moment and has to happen. It's not about me, it's about the calling of the moment. And finally, when Binyamin is abducted because he is accused of thievery and nobody knows what to do, it's Yehudah who approaches Yosef and says, I will remain the slave. Yeshiv na avdecha takazanar. I will remain here in Egypt as a slave and let Binyamin go back to his father because I cannot go back to my father without this lad. His soul is intertwined with his soul. If I go back to Yaakov without Binyamin, he will die in front of my eyes. I cannot see it. I will remain a slave forever. Let the thief or the supposed thief go back to his father. I cannot watch Yaakov melt in agony and perish in front of my eyes when he sees that he lost Yosef and he also lost Binyamin. Which is the moment that triggers Yosef to come out and say, Ani Yosef ha'odavichai lo yochel Yosef le'sapik. Yehudah in all of these stories embodies the quality of service, the quality of leadership. What is the quality of leadership? A real leader is somebody who transcends the I and focuses on the people, the nation, the group, the tribe. A leader must sometimes make very difficult decisions, but never ever with a personal agenda. If there is the personal agenda, it's not malchus, it's not leadership. On a philosophical level, then, the question is, what is Judaism and what is its calling? Is Judaism about finding yourself in God, or is Judaism about losing yourself in God? Is Judaism about Talmud, or is Judaism about Maisa? Is it about self-development, self-perfection, self-enhancement, or is it about service, submission, surrender, duty, self-actualization, or self-transcendence? Self-expression or self-forgetfulness? What is the purpose of marriage? Self-actualization or self-transcendence? Finding yourself or losing yourself? I don't want to say what's the purpose of having children. Everybody knows the answer in that one. In many ways, some people see it as the conflict between the ancient world and the modern world, where the ancient world, there was, at least according to some, there was a big focus on service to my country, service to my community, service to my king, service to whoever, or the modern world, the world of democracy, the world of individualism, the world of the I, not the we. Some people call this generation the me generation. Before Me Too, the me generation. And that's why some others want to join and say, Me Too. I don't mean Me Too as in the trend of Me Too. I mean Me Too as in, I also want to think about me. And as somebody once said, the new technology always has the name connected to I. There's iPhone, an iPod, an iPad, and even when we finally have a game that's called We, it's spelled with two I's. And the Shalah writes that when they saw Yosef, and they saw how he dressed, and they saw the colorful tunic, and they heard about his dreams, the whole world is going to bow down to him, and all the sheaves are going to bow down to him, and the sun and the moon and 11 stars are going to bow down to him, and Yaakov, and everyone is going to bow down to Yosef. He's the king, he's the ruler. They said something is wrong here. Too much ego, no bittul, no service. Besides, the Melech, Mashiach is supposed to be from David. You're a Morid b'Malchus. You're rebelling against Malchus David. Morid b'Malchus Chayev Misa. The Medrash says that some of them saw in Yosef Yeroboam. Yeroboam, the great arrogant person who would not allow the Jews to come to Yerushalayim and erected 2 statues of gold in Dan and Bethel, so Jews remain worshipping there, and he erects idolatry. He brings back idolatry of the Baal and Asherah and other idolatries back to the Jewish people in the Holy Land. And the truth is, in today's Jewish world, the tension still exists in a very powerful way. I'll tell you 2 conversations that I recently had with 2 people, and you'll hear an echo of this tension, even if in a different format, but it's still an echo. One person says to me, I cannot deal with Yiddishkeit. And the reason is, it was never ever about me. I was always a robot. My feelings, my personality, my emotions were never considered. It always had to be this way. It was this way or the highway. Nobody asked me how I feel. Nobody even ever tried to explain anything to me. Nobody identified with my experience as an individual person. At last, I want to be set free, and that must be outside of religion. And another person tells me, you know what the problem of today's kids are? They don't understand responsibility. They don't understand duty. They don't understand commitment. They don't understand that you have to forget about yourself and do the right thing. Serve. It's not about you. And so in each person's life and in each community and throughout history, there's these 2 dimensions: service, self-actualization, self-expression, self-transcendence. In one word, Yosef, Yehudah, Metzias, identity, bittul, self-nullification. Is the ultimate truth of Judaism to find yourself in truth or to lose yourself in truth? What's my ambition? What's my goal? Do I want to lose myself in truth or do I want to find myself in truth? Now the truth is that the 2 are really one. The 2 sticks, God tells Yecheskel, have to become one. But to appreciate the oneness, one has to appreciate the process. If one can't appreciate the process, they can't appreciate the oneness. What is the process and what is the oneness? And for this, we have 2 phases in Jewish history. In the first stage of Jewish history, in Egypt, Yosef is the king. The brothers bow down to him. He is the one who feeds them. He is the one who nurtures them. He is the one who sustains them. Yosef hu hashalit. Yosef mashbir bar l'chol ha'aretz. He is the ruler. He feeds the world, including his brothers. Even Yehudah bows down to Yosef. Even Yaakov, it says in Vayechi, bow down to Yosef. Tala be'idna sagidle. Later in Jewish history, Malchus goes from Yosef to Yehudah, to David HaMelech. And yet, it goes back to Yosef. There's a split. And that's when there was no reconciliation anymore, until the two sticks are brought together. Avdi David Melech Aleim Lel. Do you see what is happening? Starts with Yosef, went to Yehudah, then it went back to Yosef after Shlomo's passing, and then the split continued. The rift remained intact for hundreds of years, till the Churban, or before the Churban. And that rift has to be healed in our times, in Ikvus de Mashiach, moments before the two sticks come together, when Mashiach comes, and Hashem says, V'avdi David Melech Aleim Lo'elam, Mashiach ben David will be the king over the entire Jewish people, even Yosef, and it's going to be one. There won't be any split any longer. Because a life of service, a life of commitment, a life of dedication, a life that is completely dedicated to truth, is not a life that should exclude, dismiss, repress, and crush the self. On the contrary, that would be superficial service. God does not want me or you to serve Him as a machine, as a repressed robot, as a mechanical, mindless, emotionless mechanism. That's very superficial service, and for that He could have created robots, and they would do much better than I'll ever do. And actually He did. You know what they're called? Malachim. Angels. Angels are awesome. They scream Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh all day. But they lack the tension that the human psyche lacks, the confusion, the uncertainty, the entire drama of human existence in the world, which is why neshamas are higher than malachim. As it says, when the malachim was sent down, they became corrupt. They couldn't deal with the world. Malachim are good in heaven. Souls know how to navigate earth. Malachim can't navigate earth. Hanefilim hayu ba'aretz. Malachim are pre-programmed. They're not bali b'chira. Real service means that God wants you to serve Him with your full mind, with your full heart, with your entire passion, with all your creativity, with all your talents, with all your resources, with all your richness, with all your beauty. People often look in the mirror and say, who am I? Mi ani amani. Who am I to be talented? Who am I to be successful? Who am I to be a giver? Who am I to be a leader? Who am I to be powerful? Who am I to be empowered? Who am I to empower other people? Who am I? This is a big one. Who am I to be happy? I am, as a woman once told me, my destiny in life is to be miserable. And her question to me was, but how do I make my children happy? I said, you don't. You will make them miserable. I said, well, you have to make yourself happy. She says, never. So I said, so then you will raise children whose focus will be on making their children happy and them remaining miserable. You can't make your children happy. You could only make yourself happy. Nobody could make anybody else happy. But however, happiness is contagious. We exude happiness, and then the people around us are stimulated, are in a better place. Who am I to be gorgeous? Who am I to be wealthy? Who am I to be successful? What do you mean who you are? Who are you? You're the light of God in the world. That's what Yosef understood. You are the light of God manifested in the world. So the ultimate you is not a contradiction to the vine. The ultimate you is not some enemy of God, some idol that has to be destroyed, burnt to the ground, and decimated. The ultimate you is a manifestation of God's light in this world. And it's a unique light that comes through you. That's what Yosef understood. Yosef's self-development had nothing to do with self-worship, with egotism, with narcissism, with arrogance. It had to do with making sure that his light, which represents the divine in this world, is fully manifested, because nobody gains from the fact that you extinguish your fire. Other fires don't become bigger by you extinguishing your flame. I never saw a Hanukkah candle or a Shabbos candle saying, oh, if I burn nicely, the other candles are going to feel threatened. Let me make sure I'm extinguished. It's the other way around. When you allow your flame to burn, it gives others the confidence to light up the world. You could kindle other flames. Nobody is helped by you becoming a worthless shmata and feeling guilty for living a life of wholesomeness and happiness. It's exactly the other way around. So the ultimate self is a manifestation of divine. Ani is the same letters like ayin. Ani means I. Ayin means nothingness. Really? The ultimate ani is a conduit of the ayin. And the ultimate ayin must be expressed through the ani. The two are not contradictory. And yet, first Yosef is the king before Yehudah. Why is that? Take a look at the two structures of the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. In the Mishkan, the earth was on the bottom. The walls were made of the wood. The roof was made of animal hide, 3 layers of animal hide. So you had earth on the bottom. You had sackets of gold, also mineral gold. Inside you had beams of cedar plated with gold. And then you had the roof of the animal kingdom. So you have Chai on the top, Tzemeach on the sides, Daimim on the bottom. The Beis HaMikdash, from floor to roof, it was all marble and mortar. Stone and earth, cement, mortar and marble. All Daimim. And the wood in the Beis HaMikdash was embedded in the stone. Support inside. Wood, Tzemeach represents growth. Yosef, Ke'erez Balvana and Yizge. Trees grow. Daimim, earth, seems lifeless, receptive. It carries us. The earth says, come, build your home on me, walk on me, move on me, plant on me, drive your car on me. I will carry you. The earth carries us. And the earth produces all vegetation and produce from which we're all nurtured. In the Mishkan, the first stage of history, Daimim is on the bottom, Tzemeach and Chai are on the top. In the Beis HaMikdash, it's the other way around. The Mishkan was in the territory of Yosef, the Beis HaMikdash in the territory of Yehudah. In order for Yehudah to be the king, first Yosef has to be the king. Yosef being the king before Yehudah is not undermining Yehudah. It's a preparation for Yehudah to be the king. First Yosef is the king. Or to put it in these words, Metzius is the beginning of Bittul. Self-development is the prelude, the genesis that allows complete service. It allows complete dedication. That's why in the first stage of history, even Yehudah receives from Yosef. Yosef becomes the king who gives Yehudah. In the first stage of history, in the first stage of a person's development, the person understands the beauty and the depth of self-actualization. There is always a need for Yehudah. There's always a need for discipline, surrender. How do we begin our day? Moide ani lefanecha. Moide, I thank you, I submit to you. We start off with Birchas HaShachar. We start off davening with the words, Hoidu Lashem Kiru B'Shmo Yediv Amal Yosef. There's never growth without surrender. There's no growth without discipline. There's no growth without challenging yourself. There's no growth if I don't put my foot to the metal and execute. There's no growth if I don't tell myself, this is what I have to do, even if I'm not in the mood of it, even if I don't feel it. There's no growth without commitment and dedication, which will always include moments of service and self-transcendence. Because if not, If my condition for growth is I have to feel comfortable, will you ever go to the gym? Will you ever exercise? Will you ever go on that diet? Or any other quality? A person needs to be able to stick it through, and sticking it through means I can't always follow my moods, and if I don't feel like it, it's gone. There's always a need for Yehudah. The beginning of the day is commitment. But in the beginning of history, Yosef is the king, and Yehudah receives from Yehudah. Yehudah receives from Yosef. Bittul is Adin and Metzias. The Afar receives from the Daimim and the Tzameach and the Chai. It's a receptacle from it. It's nurtured by it. And then Yosef can transfer the Malchus to Yehudah, to David HaMelech. And now Yosef becomes the recipient of Yehudah. Just like in the Beis HaMikdash, there is wood, but the wood is embedded in the stone. Meaning, in the service, there is also the self-growth. But the self-growth is seen as an extension of the service. It's all an extension of the oneness. It's all an extension of the service. Because service does not mean the self is gone. Service means that the self is also part of the service. So while in the first stage, Yosef is the king, second stage, Yehudah becomes the king, and the structure changes from the Mishkan to the Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan by Yosef, the Beis HaMikdash by Yehudah. Comes God to Yeroboam and he says, Yeroboam, do tshuva, and me and you and David HaMelech will stroll. Of course he comes first. Yosef comes first. Yeroboam is a wise man. He says, Mi beroish. I want to know who's really first. I want to know if Yosef is forever first, or I want to know if Yosef is first, but ultimately it's going to go to Yehudah. And Hashem says, Ben Yishai beroish, ihachi loy be'ina. And here is the uniqueness. When Yeroboam says, if so, I don't want it. And you see the difference between him and Yosef. Yeroboam could not accept the fact that ultimately the Malchus will go from Yosef to Yehudah. You're the head now. Mi beroish. Hashem says you're first. But he wants to know who's really first. Who's really on the top? Will it remain this way forever? He says, no. Ben Yishai is on the top. Why is Ben Yishai on the top? Because the definition of Yehudah is Va'avdi David, my servant. And real service doesn't undermine Yosef. It's unified with Yosef. But depends what type of Yosef you have. And there's the difference between Yosef and Yeroboam. For Yosef, self-actualization is really divine actualization. For Yeroboam, self-actualization is about self-centered egotism. Self-actualization brings you further apart from who you really are. It's a self that is at dissonance with your true core, with your true essence. I worship the self at the expense of my true self. I worship the self at the expense of my true calling. I worship the self at the expense of my true inner selflessness. My self never recognizes its seamlessness with my selflessness. My self never recognizes itself as a reflection of infinity and divinity. My self never recognizes its grandeur. My ego thinks it has to protect itself in a small way because it's so small. My ego doesn't recognize that when ego stands for ease God out, the ego actually becomes much smaller, much more contained, much more narrow. So Yeroboam ben Nevat says in the ultimate equation of things, Mi beroish, who comes first? He says Ben Yishai. Ben Yishai represents commitment to truth. Ben Yishai represents holistic truth. Ben Yishai represents Va'avdi David, the bittul of David. He says, this I don't want. The Shvatim saw Yosef. This is what they were concerned about. They were concerned about the self-actualization that ends in narcissism, that ends in egotism. Yeroboam ben Nevat was a deep fellow, but at that moment of truth, he was not ready to give up on the ego. At the moment of truth, he couldn't surrender to real truth. At the moment of truth, he said, I forever have to find myself. I am not ready to give up that sense of I. where Yosef also wants to find himself in order to lose himself. Yosef wants to find himself in God in order to be able to lose himself in God. Yosef wants to find himself in God in order to be able to manifest that light through him, in order to be able to truly serve. And that's why when the two sticks come together and David becomes the Melech, this is not a rejection of Yosef. On the contrary, it's the unification of Yosef, because it's the recognition of a Yehudah that encompasses Yosef, that includes Yosef, where Yosef is completely one with it. Because when Yosef has been worked through, when the avodah of Yosef has been worked through, it becomes a prelude to Yehudah, not a rejection of Yehudah. And therefore he tells Yecheskel, "Va'avdi David melech aleim la'olam," my servant David will be the king over the entire Jewish people. Have a wonderful week.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.